So, welcome back to another edition of the Heart to Heart podcast. And my guest today is Dr. Adrian Chavez, who's a nutritionist. So, Dr. Chavez, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And if anyone's wondering, watching on video, we didn't coordinate both wearing a colored blue shirt. It just kind of worked out that way. But so again, thanks for coming on the show. And the reason why I wanted to have you on was because I just think you put out some really good information regarding nutrition. There's no nonsense in there. It's all very evidence based, and I just really appreciate your material. I saw some of your posts recently, and one that definitely caught my eye was the one on intermittent fasting, and just the reason being because I know it's very, very popular nowadays, and like yourself, I'm certainly not discrediting it as like a valid technique to improve your overall nutrition and your health. It's just that it seems like for the most part, you basically are getting benefits, or people benefit from doing intermittent fasting ultimately because they just end up restricting their calories overall, and that seems to be what you found in your research. Is that right?
Yeah, that's definitely right. And I mean, I was on the intermittent fasting bandwagon a decade ago. Like a lot of this intermittent fasting stuff kind of came from. I mean, there was studies like the animal studies and some human studies early on that showed some pretty significant benefit to sticking to a fasting window, and that's where a lot of the buzz came from. I mean, it really did come from some quality science. But then as science evolves over the years, and scientists started doing studies where they actually compared intermittent fasting protocols to protocols that were matched in calories, but they weren't fasting. That's what we didn't have early on. Like a decade ago, it was just like rat studies where they're like, they're doing alternate day fasting for a rat, which is like, it's like a human going like weeks without eating. And they have these rats eating every other day, and some of them live longer. And that seemed like, oh wow, fasting might be helpful for longevity. But we can't really translate that to humans because it doesn't even happen in every rat. Like some rats actually don't even increase their lifespan. Some animals don't increase their lifespan when we were doing this in lab research. So this is, intermittent fasting came from real science where some of these studies in rats and humans showed benefit, like the human studies when they had people do alternate day fasting, or when they had people do any type of 8-hour window, people would lose weight, people would have improvements in health, and it seemed pretty substantial. I myself, like a decade ago, I used to fast. I did like 3-day fast and all this stuff because I had seen some of that research. It seemed very promising. I hear people talking about it, like Walter Longo talking about it, wanted to try it out. But over the last eight or so years, 10 years, studies have been published where we compare, fasting protocol to the same protocol, like same calories, but, people eat throughout the day. And those are the studies that have really shifted, the thinking over the last few years of really demonstrating like there's not really a benefit to fasting. The only studies that have shown like a benefit, individuals just eat less because they can't eat enough in the window. So they lose a little bit more weight because they're eating a little bit less, not necessarily because they're going a certain period of time without eating.
Okay, so I think that's a really good summary of it. So basically, when you compare it to like a calorie restriction or calorie restricted diet, you're going to get the exact same results, and you're going to get the exact same results because overall the caloric intake, if they are both adjusted for and equal, meaning the people who eat who are doing intermittent fasting, if they eat the same amount of calories as someone who's just eating a regular calorie restricted diet under the same amount of calories, then you're going to get basically the same results overall.
Pretty much. And so, that's where fasting now goes from this, this magical thing to now it's just a tool. It's a tool that can be really helpful for managing energy intake. A lot of people, a fasting, what the fasting window does? The most important thing that a fasting window does for people, in my experience, it stops them from late night binging. And for most people, like after dinner, the snacks where you're watching TV and you pull out the ice cream and the chips, like that is the primary source of extra calories for most people. So if you create this arbitrary rule where now you can't eat after a certain period of time, well, that gets cut out. And so sometimes I think it just helps people who need like a strong rule to follow so that they avoid some of these things that they may be eating later at night. And that really, like, everybody I've worked with who like benefits from intermittent fasting or who really likes it, like most of the time it's because when they're not sticking to a fasting window, they end up just after dinner, there's that 3 hours or 4 hours where you start to get hungry a bit. You're hanging out with your wife or whatever, your girlfriend, and you start, going in the kitchen and grabbing the snacks, and that's a big factor in my opinion. Like, it's just sometimes we just need hard rules, and fasting for some people creates a nice hard rule to help manage that energy intake.
Yeah, and I think what it does for some people too is it's more or less simplistic, right? So it's like, what can I eat now? Nothing. What can I eat between in this 8 hour window?
Whatever you want.
Yeah. So it just makes it kind of, easy for people. And I think also too, why people like it, in addition to not snacking late at night and that, decreasing overall caloric intake and obviously, improving body composition and health. The morning, I think people get used to not having to cook breakfast or not having to, prepare meals kind of thing, which is very, very convenient because I have done intermittent fasting before. I don't do it too often now. Like when I do it now, it's more or less just because I just do it like naturally kind of thing. It's like, oh, I'm away today. I'm driving somewhere and I'm just not going to eat on the road today. And sometimes I do that. But in general, like I still don't eat in the morning though, just because I liked that habit, so I still don't have my first meal till like 12 or 1 o'clock, but it's not necessarily because I think that I'm getting all these benefits from intermittent fasting in terms of changing my health. It's just that I enjoy not making breakfast in the morning. It's just very convenient to get your coffee and go, and I think that's a big reason why a lot of people like doing it too.
Yeah, and you know what's funny about that? Did you say that? Because we all know people who have been intermittent fasting their whole lives, who just don't eat breakfast. Like we all know people who do that, who don't eat until lunch anyway. Like these people will be the healthiest people we knew if fasting was so magical, because like I know multiple people that I'm not going to name any of them, but I know multiple people who aren't in great health that never eat breakfast. And they would be like incredibly healthy if intermittent fasting was some magical tool that improved health. What I would do want to say though, along those lines of what you just said, what you're mentioning is probably like the worst eating pattern in terms of timing. So timing is food timing doesn't seem to be that important when it comes to like metabolism and fat loss, but it does make a small difference. And there's been an increasing number of studies that have been published over the last like 7 years. This is more of a new, people call it like chrononutrition or time restricted feeding, but there's evidence to show that when we eat more of our calories later in the day, as opposed to earlier, when we actually need them, that might negatively affect our metabolism, because what we're doing is we're forcing our body to go during the periods of time where we need energy, off of using, internal fuel sources. But when we get to the point in the day where we don't need energy, which is at nighttime, that's when we're eating most of our calories. If you kind of follow that pattern, you're eating more of your calories at the time of the day that you don't need them. And according to like our circadian rhythms, like our bodies better equipped to digest food in the morning and in the lunchtime as opposed to at night. So there's actually been studies that have been published recently, and the differences aren't like massive, but there'll be studies where they show eating the same amount of calories, which kind of blew my mind when I first saw these studies. And there's marginal differences in fat loss when individuals eat a large breakfast versus a large dinner. And so what you're describing is what a lot of people do with fasting is, they delay their eating window till later in the day, and they eat a bunch at the end of the day when they don't need it. And then a lot of that ends up getting stored because our body's not metabolizing it as well. because our hormonal system is actually shifting towards rest and recovery and sleep as opposed to digesting food. So these recent studies that have been published have shown like when you shift that, like if there is a benefit to intermittent fasting, the benefit is cutting off early as opposed to, not eating early. Like it's the complete opposite of what most people are doing. Is the benefit to intermittent fasting would be eat a bunch of food in for breakfast, like eat a big breakfast, eat a big lunch, small dinner and cut off after that, or small early dinner and cut off after that. And that, like in terms of like, time restricted feeding schedule, like that seems to be the most helpful thing to do if you do want to see some benefits of like shifting the timing of your nutrition. That seems to be more helpful than the approach that you and I take, the same approach that you're taking. Like I'm saying this, but I still do what you do because I'm just lazy in the morning oftentimes, and that's okay. Like it's not that big of a deal. Like it's a small percentage. Like what you're eating matters more. Like the quality of your food matters a lot more. Whether or not you're exercising, all that's going to matter more. It's a small difference. But if you wanted to like really take the ideal approach would be eat most of your food when you need the calories, and then kind of shut that off later in the night when you don't need the calories.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so don't be afraid to eat breakfast then if you feel like have better energy and you just kind of have a better general sense of well-being. If you do well with that, like go for it and don't really like think that it's going to affect your your overall body composition, as long as again you still keep in check your energy intake and your macronutrients. Okay.
Yep.
And go ahead.
Yeah, what I was going to say is that like if you did want it to take advantage of like quote unquote intermittent fasting, the best window, if you're going to go 8-hour window, that'd be like 9 to 5 or 8 to 4, not 1 to 9, which is what people are, which is most people are doing. That's what I always did. I would do the 1 to 9 thing like back then, and then some of this research came out. I was like, I was doing the complete opposite. If I was trying to get a benefit of a like fasting window, the fasting window should be earlier if you're going to try to get a benefit of the fasting window, because you eat your food when you need it and you cut it off when you don't. And that's more in line with our circadian rhythm and metabolism, and our body responds better to that. And again, I do what you're doing. So I'm not like, to me, I'm not like, convenience matters most, and what you're able to stick with and what works with your schedule, and all of those things are going to matter more than like, whether or not you ate at 8 a.m. or 10 a.m. Those are more important. But, if you did want to get the ideal approach, it would be a early eating window as opposed to a later.
But overall, you would probably summarize it that like 95% of the benefit is going to come from, making sure you have good energy intake overall compared to, how much you're expending. And then also just your macronutrients and the amount of nutrients that you're taking in. So more or less, like, don't really worry too much about like the window of eating, and just focus more on what you're eating and how much you're eating.
And convenience and sustainability. What you can stick to, because like you mentioned, like it's a convenience thing. You just don't feel like cooking in the morning, so that's fine. Like that's perfectly fine. It's better for you to do that than to force yourself to do something that's not convenient, that doesn't work for you, that you're not going to stick with.
Stick to the diet that works. And if you're on an intermittent fasting diet and it works for you, then there's no real point in changing.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah.
And one other benefit too of intermittent fasting, as long as you cut off your window 2-3 hours before bed, which I think some people do, maybe not everybody does, but that can be helpful also too for rest, just for your overall sleep. So I think that people may get that benefit without really knowing why. Like they may be sleeping better and be like, oh, since I've been intermittent fasting, I'm sleeping better. And you guess indirectly you could say it is a result of the intermittent fasting, but it's really, you don't have to intermittent fast to get that result. You just don't have to eat 2 or 3 hours before bed. Some people might say 4 hours. Like, do you have any comments on that with regard to like eating before bed? Like, do you think that's something that could really mess up your sleep? Or
I think it depends on what you eat. I'm not very familiar. And again, I know that the impact is marginal at best. And when you talk about eating before sleep, there's a difference between eating ice cream and chips before you fall asleep as opposed to like eating some Greek yogurt for muscle gain benefit. So it depends on what your goals are in terms of eating before you sleep, because individuals who are trying to gain muscle, like having a protein rich meal right before you go to sleep might actually enhance muscle protein synthesis, because that's when our body's repairing muscle, is like at nighttime. So for those individuals, and if that's your goal, is to optimize muscle growth, or maintain as much muscle as possible during weight loss, then having a small protein, a protein rich meal like right before you go to bed might actually be helpful. And I don't think there's any evidence to show that it may be harmful. I think um, I'm not very familiar with that science in terms of like the sleep and nutrition, but I'm pretty confident that it's more has to do with like eating high carb meals before, because you're increasing glucose, and it just makes it more difficult because your
Yeah.
body's the higher levels of glucose. Because when we have high levels of glucose, that actually increases the amount of energy that we expend. Like if you compare two groups of people and one of them ate like 100% sugar and the other one ate 100% fat, the 100% sugar would expend more energy, because glucose levels in the blood are very, very high, and the body will do what it can to get rid of that. So I think that's where some of the sleep disruption science is more so, is in the higher glucose based meals right before, like really high amounts of sugar and things like that right before you're going to bed, as opposed to like a smaller snack that's not going to cause that type of like glucose response.
Okay, yeah, I remember like, I mean, I did this now, this is over like 10 years ago, but I don't know if you remember like the casein protein kind of, yeah.
I did the
So
same thing for so long.
just so I just have like two bottles of protein. So I had, my like fast way, which I thought, right after I work out, this is what I'm gonna have. It's gonna go straight into my muscles. And then, I'm gonna have this casein protein before bed. But so do you feel like that's more or less like nonsense now? Like it seems like you don't adopt that practice anymore anyway.
No, not at all. I mean, I think the difference, it's the protein amount. The casein protein is slower digesting, but it causes digestive problems in a lot of people as well. Like I remember how messed up my gut was when I was trying to do that. Like when I was having casein every night, and I would wake up and like have GI issues, and I'm like it makes sense to me later on. But I think I'm a bigger fan of a meal before bed, as opposed, or like something small before bed, like yogurt is a really good one. Like if you did a
Yeah.
yogurt and yogurt's going to be mostly casein protein. So I think that's probably better, as opposed to doing the protein shake. Protein shake's fine, but again, these are things that, unless you're like a bodybuilder, or really trying to like optimize muscle growth, which these are so marginal
Yeah.
that like it doesn't matter. These are the things that people get so caught up in sometimes, where it's like at the end of the day, and I've been doing this for a while. It sounds like you have too. Like, I mean, I've been training and paying attention to my nutrition and trying to improve my health since I was 18 years old. So, it's been quite some time for me since I've been doing that, and over 15 years now. And I went through all the different phases of, getting really into bodybuilding, and getting really into clean eating, and getting really into, these different approaches. And what you find, well, as I read more literature and understand the topic more, and, I got my PhD in nutrition. So that kind of broke up a lot of those, things that I was doing that I think were not based in science. But, what you find is that the most important thing is sustainability, because at the end of the day, you have your body for the rest of your life. You're going to be eating for the rest of your life. This has to be something that you can sustain for forever. And if you're eating, like, for example, if you're eating yogurt before bed, cool. If you're in like a 12-week phase, or you're trying to gain muscle, but to do that forever, or like to always like, take a casein shake before bed, you're not going to do that for the rest of your life. There's no point in that, to be honest. Like that's just, we sometimes we have to simplify our nutrition, as opposed to trying to overcomplicate it, in my opinion. Like the goal should be to have the simplest approach possible that you feel good with, that you can sustain, as opposed to like optimizing every little piece, because even when you're like quote unquote optimizing things, first of all, the benefits of that is marginal. And then second of all, oftentimes when we're doing things that we think are optimal, there's not really any science to back that up. Like with the intermittent fasting stuff, like that was based on like, a little bit of science, but going through all that, like let's say you did years of fasting like I did, where I would like only eat between this window, and like that's a lot of effort for
It is.
potentially what reward at the end of the day. Like not really anything based in science, like not really anything major. And so I think a lot of people put in way too much effort for these things that are like 2%, 1%, which may be necessary if you're like a pro athlete or something. But if you're just the average individual who's trying to maintain a nice physique, feel good, look good, be healthy, that stuff is just that's gonna make it less likely that 5 years from now you're still living this lifestyle, in my opinion.
And a lot of people too on intermittent fasting, I know you did a video on this recently, talk about, and again, I hear this word, called many different words, autophagy. I've heard it. Like there's so people pronounce that word so many different ways. But anyway, so what is your overall opinion on that? Because it seems like this is one of those things where like people are like, I'm going to do the intermittent fasting. I'm going to get the autophagy, going on, and then that's what's going to keep me, living forever. But it seems like there's very, very marginal benefit in increasing autophagy through intermittent fasting. And also too, if you do want to increase, you can get the same benefit just through calorie restriction.
Exactly. So the autophagy or autophagy is what other people call it. I mean, I think this stuff gets written in papers and then we read it and no one knows what to call it. So everyone just says whatever they pronounce it as when they read it. But autophagy or autophagy, it's a process where when we are in an energy deprived state, our cells will basically go in and start breaking down tissues and organelles and things that aren't being used right now. And they'll do that for energy, because when you break that down, you have amino acids and energy, and you can like when you're deprived of energy, that's a good way to get energy, is to start breaking down some of these unused organelles and tissues and things like that. When you fast, autophagy is like completely upregulated because it's an extreme energy deprived state. You're putting yourself in a situation where you're going long periods of time without eating, and energy availability is very low in the body for a long period of time. So autophagy goes up dramatically. As soon as you eat, completely gets shut off. If you're doing a calorie restriction instead of fasting, autophagy is going to be upregulated a little bit the whole day. So what's going to happen is, as opposed to having a spike in autophagy and then it's going to go down, you're going to have a level that's going to stay up for most of the day, because you're not eating these massive meals that you have to eat to get your calories in during intermittent fasting. And the overall amount of autophagy that occurs is going to be the same. Now, we can't really measure this stuff, to be honest. So like, this is a theory. This has been done in rat studies, though, to where they're actually looking at these things and they're comparing the upregulation of these enzymes and things like in rats versus, the rats that are fasting versus the rats that are not. And we don't really see a benefit. The other piece is that people make this autophagy thing out to be like some amazing, beneficial thing, where yes, it is, because overeating is bad. And if you're overeating, you're never going to be in autophagy. So if you're always overeating, then your body's never going to have to break down those tissues, and they're going to accumulate and over time. But that comes down to calories. If you upregulate this process, that's called starvation. Like if autophagy, like that's a response to starvation. And so we can upregulate it to the greatest degree by starving ourselves to death. Like that doesn't mean that it's beneficial for our health. And that's where this is just a buzzword, to be honest. There's a lot of words that they get people's attention. You mentioned any word that's gonna have like it sounds new and exciting.
Yeah.
And the way that things blow up on social media and blow up in popular culture is new and exciting. Everyone wants to jump on the bandwagon of new and exciting, but new and exciting by nature means that there's not evidence for it. Like
Yeah.
that's like if something's new and exciting, that just automatically means that there's not a lot of evidence for it.
Not tried, true, and tested. If it's brand new.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when we chase after like all these things that are new and exciting, we're missing oftentimes the things that actually matter, the things that have been well established over 50 years to be beneficial for our health. Those things aren't new and exciting. Like telling people to eat more vegetables, that's not exciting. No one wants to hear that. People want to hear that they can go carnivore and get healthier. So when you tell people that message blows up. Whereas, telling people things that are actually established, things that are evidence-based, things that we know for a fact will lead to a positive improvement in health over time because there's so much evidence for it. That stuff it doesn't get traction like this other stuff. And that's, you have to frame it differently. Like my account, I try to like make it entertaining by calling it like anti-biohacking and stuff like that, because that's the only way that people pay attention. Like I can't get people to pay attention to moving 30 minutes a day, paying attention to sleep, stress management, spending time outside, eating more fruits and vegetables, eating balanced meals, eating plenty of protein, like these things that we know are important for our health and foundational health habits that we all should be practicing, and just focus on getting really consistent with these things that we know to be beneficial. That stuff's not exciting at all. Like if I tell someone to do that, they're going to tune right out. But if I put some exciting name to it, if I call it anti-biohacking, people get excited about it. Like, so I've learned to like frame these things that we know people need to be doing, because I'm not going to go online and start making stuff up. That's what all these other people do, and it just bothers the crap out of me because
like Paul Saladino.
Yeah,
So, I mean, I usually don't call out names, but I know that he's one guy. He's a carnivore guy, and I know it recently. Actually, he has added in, I guess. It's not carnivore anyway. He's got like,
he's not even carnivore anymore.
Yeah,
He still calls himself carnivore.
He's got fruit. He's got honey, full fat dairy. Something else I think is in there too. So it's like, man, like that's not just meat. Like it's a lot easier to follow. I mean, I'm not saying that you should follow this diet even with the additions, but I mean, I could follow that diet a lot longer than I could for the carnivore diet. And that's why I never, ever even attempted the carnivore diet, because of what you said earlier. Like, there's no way I would ever be able to sustain that. I wouldn't be able to do carnivore for one day. I mean, I probably could, but like, I wouldn't enjoy myself. You know what I mean? Like, I just wouldn't want to be that restricted.
Anyone who has considered or been curious about this diet, go join like a carnivore group on Facebook. Go join one and you'll see why you shouldn't do this diet. I can post 150 screenshots. I can go through, I'm in a couple of carnivore groups of people developing real health issues from this diet. But the messaging from Paul Saladino and the other carnivore people have really brainwashed individuals, to be honest. Like him saying that, like, oh, plants have toxins. That's such BS. Like I could do the same thing. Like I could tell you that you shouldn't eat meat because you should only eat raw meat because when you cook meat, it creates compounds called polycystic aromatic hydrocarbons that damage our DNA and can lead to cancer. That's completely true. It's completely true, but it increases our cancer risk a little bit. And like there's it's like a little bit of truth to it, and then you're exaggerating it, saying it out of context to get people to do what you do. And it's really like it's manipulation. It's manipulation, to be honest. Like a lot of these popular diet gurus, they are trained to manipulate people. They know, and that's why you'll always see them scaring you about things. This is going to kill you, because if you scare someone, you get their attention. As soon as you scare someone, you have their attention. And then once you have their attention, you can go further along and completely make something up after that. So if I say, hey, and if you scare someone, especially if you say something new, broccoli is BS, he gets on a camera and says broccoli is BS, and then he talks about this mechanism. But every study that's ever been published where we look at people who eat more broccoli, they live longer, they have lower rates of cancer. We feed people broccoli, it leads to improvements in health. Like how is broccoli harming people?
Yeah.
It's not. It's just these messages get
Really
propagated.
effective for prostate cancer, isn't it? Or I think
Yeah,
that's
I
one
mean,
of the
it's
cancers that anyway.
multiple cancers.
Yeah.
Broccoli is associated with a reduction in risk in multiple cancers. All plants are. Like there, tomatoes, broccoli, blueberry, like all these plants that these individuals are telling you not to eat.
Tom Brady's really against, I guess, lampshade stuff like tomatoes and that, or I think anyway, he is. Maybe I'm wrong
Yes,
on that, but
there's no evidence for that. Like
no.
tomato consumption is associated with the reduction in prostate cancer. Tomato feeding people tomatoes reduces markers of inflammation because there's antioxidant nutrients in them. There's never been a study where there was like you eat tomatoes and it causes a negative effect. The reason is because in a cell, if you take a petri dish and you put like a high amount of some of these compounds, these nightshade compounds, with our immune cells will develop complexes to those compounds. But that's completely different than eating a food. Completely different than eating a food. And that's where a lot of these justifications for the carnivore stuff, that's where the majority of it comes from. Is he's talking about cellular mechanisms that do not play out that way in actual humans when we're consuming food. There's a massive difference between what happens in a cell and what happens in humans. For example, gluten, the whole gluten-free craze, that came about because of when you mix gluten, like that they took intestinal cells and they pulled them out of like cadavers, and they put gluten and they mixed it with the intestinal cell, and it led to increased intestinal permeability. And that was in 2005, I think, that study was published. After that, the gluten-free craze came about because some of the people who published it said, hey, gluten is actually a problem in healthy people because it caused this effect in healthy people. The problem is that gluten doesn't come into contact with your intestinal cells like that when you actually eat it. We have enzymes that break down those proteins. We have a mucosal layer on our gut that protects those cells from becoming like interacting with our microbiome and with the food in our intestines. But if you ignore that, or if you want, like if you have an agenda, you want people to believe a certain thing, you can take that information and frame it in a way that is misleading and not telling the whole picture. Because when we take individuals, even people who say they're sensitive to gluten, who think they're sensitive to gluten, like who say, I have non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So if we recruit 100 people who say they have non-celiac gluten sensitivity, like they say, hey, I don't tolerate gluten well, and we feed them blindly, like you can feed them gluten. There was a study where 12% of people actually reacted to gluten. The other 88% didn't, but it was a blind test. Whereas when someone if you think you're reacting to gluten and then you go eat something and it, maybe you went and had a crazy night and you haven't eaten gluten in months. And then, one night you go have a slice of pizza and your gut hurts the next day. You're like, oh, it was gluten, because someone put that information into your head that gluten's a problem for people, and you're looking for gluten to be a problem, as opposed to like really looking at the picture and understanding like, oh, maybe it was the 7 drinks and pizza, not the gluten.
So are there any then, Adrian, randomized control trials on healthy people indicating that restricting gluten is beneficial whatsoever? No.
Nope.
None.
None.
So basically, unless you have celiacs, like gluten is not really overall harmful to your health.
Yeah, I mean, even randomized control trials in individuals who have like who have celiac or like have non-celiac gluten sensitivity, or say they do. We haven't shown benefit to removing gluten. And there's actually multiple studies that have shown that when you take out gluten, because of the foods that you tend to be avoiding, people tend to eat a little bit less fiber. A lot of the gluten-free options are higher, and it's like rice, where it's no fiber. They take out all the fiber, and so you end up eating less fiber. And studies show that people who have been on a long-term gluten-free diet tend to have a less diverse microbiome, which might be a bad thing. And that's not going to be the case in celiac individuals, but in individuals who are removing foods for no reason, which is carnivore diet. Like I, and the reason I speak out about this so much sometimes is because I work with a lot of people. Like I used to run a bunch of group programs and stuff, and I've worked with over 1,000 people probably at this point. And I've seen so much like negative health effects from people doing this stuff. Like I had a client that was on a carnivore diet for a year and a half and messed up his gut. Like he substantially messed up his gut, messed up his whole health was completely messed up because of misinformation, because someone told him that plants were toxic. And that's a problem. Like that's a big issue. Like you're really creating health issues because someone lied to you.
Yeah, and I think Saladino too had. I know we're picking on him a little bit this podcast, but he had one on like coffee too recently, and like yeah, there's some negative effects of drinking too much coffee, and for sure you want to get higher quality coffee as opposed to lower quality coffee. I mean, some of that is just because of the taste. I just if there's one thing I'm a snot with, it might be coffee. I like a good cup. But I mean, there's numerous benefits to drinking coffee, and as long as you keep your caffeine around 200, probably don't push it more than 300 a day. You should be pretty good to go overall. Like, and again, like I think that's another big myth that isn't put out there too much, but it is put out there a little bit. Like coffee is not detrimental to your health. I mean, if you're putting a bunch of sugar and cream, okay, that's different. We're just talking about like good quality black coffee.
You know what blows my mind? So the studies that have been done on coffee. So when we do some of these large studies on nutrition, so what we do is we'll like follow people over time, and we'll look at individuals who drink coffee versus those who don't. People who drink coffee have like 10 to 15% lower rate of cancer, about 15 to 20% lower rate of heart disease, lower rates of Alzheimer's, dementia. Liver cancer seems to be one that is really important because of the way that the coffee nutrients. Coffee is the number one antioxidant in our diet, in the American diet, and that's just mainly because the American diet's horrible. But like this, when someone says coffee's bad, like it's ignoring every piece of evidence that exists on coffee. Coffee generally seems to produce a pretty positive health benefit. Like, and that benefit is like up to 5 or 6 cups. And what I was going to say earlier, like what amazes me is that the studies have been done. All these studies, we've been tracking people for 40 years now or 50 years now, depending on the study. Some of them, 25-year studies where, it got published, and, maybe it's published in 2010, went back 25 years. They started collecting this data in 1985 or 1980, and people were drinking crap coffee, like with like no one drank coffee without sugar or cream back then, and there's still a benefit from it. Like, yeah. Like that's what blows my mind. I'm like, because I used to think that coffee was like not good for your health until I started reading the research. Like this was way before I went to get my Ph.D. And then I read those studies, and I'm like, dang, this blows my mind. Like these people, none of these people are drinking black coffee. Like we have to look at like what the way people are drinking coffee in the average population. They're not drinking it black, and they're still showing a benefit from coffee consumption. So like that to me is
yeah, it's just a sign that like it's definitely has some type of protective benefit overall for your health. And you may even say that there's probably even a small decrease in all-cause mortality at the end.
Oh, there is
for coffee drinkers.
Yeah, there's a small decrease in all. I mean, pretty much every chronic disease for the most part seems to be positively affected by moderate consumption of caffeine. Now, this seems to be somewhat regulated by genetics. So some individuals who don't process caffeine very well may not experience as much of a benefit because their body's just having a harder time breaking down that caffeine. But because those individuals, like there was one study that there was a slight increase in stroke risk based on a genetic, people's genetic ability to break down coffee. But most people who have that, genetic predisposition know, because when they drink coffee, they don't feel good. and they just don't drink it. Like most of those people already aren't drinking coffee.
And coming back to all cause mortality in the carnivore diet, fiber. So like fiber has been shown in like numerous, randomized control trials, reviews, big reviews,
Everything.
that it decreases all cause mortality, decrease risk of cancer. Like there's so many benefits to consuming fiber, and that's a big thing that can get left out of a carnivore diet, which is something that I think a lot of people don't hear all the time when they hear from the carnivore people, is that
Well,
fiber is critically important.
those people will tell you that fiber's not necessary. And the thing is that oftentimes, in especially with individuals with gut issues, like underlying gut issues. So if you have underlying gut issue and you're eating lots of fiber and it's causing GI issues for you because fiber is harder to break down, it gets fermented by the bacteria in our gut. Those bacteria can produce gases. If you have dysbiosis or whatever the case may be, fiber can be uncomfortable to consume for various reasons. So it's my opinion that Saladino, because I've heard a story that because I work with GI issues, like that's my one-to-one specialty is
Okay.
individuals with GI issues. I've heard a story, and I'm pretty confident that he had gut issues, and he removed there's foods called FODMAPs. They're fermentable carbohydrates. If you remove all carbs, you're removing all FODMAPs, and low FODMAP diet is clinically proven to have a substantial improvement for individuals with IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. I've heard a story, and he says like, "Oh, I had all these GI issues, but then they got better when they went on a carnivore diet." Well, he essentially took out, some of these FODMAPs, where if he would actually worked with someone who knew what they were doing, they could have guided him in actually removing the foods that were a problem, keeping the ones that aren't a problem in, and actually maintaining a balanced diet and not having to go down this rabbit hole. But when you don't know what you're doing, and you don't know nutrition at all, and you take away this, and it feels better, then you make up a story about it, and you make up a story saying, "Oh, it was the plant toxins." It wasn't the plant toxins. It's the fact that, in my opinion, most likely it was FODMAPs. And then when you take out all carbs, you're eating less of those, you feel better. And there is one study that showed that individuals who are chronically constipated, who aren't like they don't respond well to medication either, when they go on a zero fiber diet, it helps them get moving. And so the approach there is, kind of take away some of the fiber, because fiber increases bulk in the stool, and if you're all backed up, and you don't need more bulk. And so taking away the fiber, adding in a lot of fat, because fat's oily and kind of softens the stool, can help get things moving. But you shouldn't be doing that forever. There's a page called Carnivore Cringe on Instagram, and they post a lot of they post some of these things, like some of these posts that individuals with, like they're in some of the carnivore groups, and they just share some of the stuff that they find from the carnivore groups. And what you will find is that, like, that's the biggest issue, like that's the biggest side effect early on, is people will get super constipated or have explosive diarrhea on this type of diet. And it's insane to me, because again, a lot of times people they get so they believe so heavily in the information that this doctor, because he's a doctor and he sounds like he knows what he's talking about, they really believe it. And if they felt better, when they first, and the other reason, like if you go on a carnivore diet, you're going to eat less calories, like for most people. So you're going to feel better. If you've always had a hard time restricting calories, well, this is an easier way to restrict calories. Is it's one of those hard cutoffs. If I told everyone to only eat on Sunday and Thursday, a lot of people would improve their health. Like a lot of people will lose weight and improve their health. Does that mean that I have some magic formula? No, it's just I placed in this ridiculous rule that forced people to eat less,
Yeah.
and they felt better as a result. People, I can make up this crazy story about, like, ancient people in this, there was this ancient civilization who lived in this location, and they used to live to 150 years old because they would only eat on Sundays and Thursdays. If I said that on social media, and I said it with complete confidence, and I just kept repeating it, you know how many people would only eat on Sunday and Thursday? And you know how many people would turn around and be like, "Oh my God, this guy's a genius." Like he just
People listening to it, probably.
yeah, and it would be like, "Oh my God, this guy just came up with the there would be a group of followers who would be evangelists for my Sunday and Thursday plan." And then they would tell everyone how much, like, look, I lost all this weight. Like all I had to do was, only eat on Sunday and Thursday. Like it was super simple. And this is the hack that we've all been missing. But the reality is that most people who do these things don't see a benefit from it. And a lot of people get worse. But when you operate on social media, you can create an echo chamber. If anyone comments on one of his posts saying, "Hey, I did a carnivore diet, but I have horrible explosive diarrhea and I'm miserable," they'll delete it. I promise you, they'll delete it. They delete any that
Any
they
negative thing. So then the information then is completely
it's
biased.
all positive. And and you create an echo chamber of like just everyone thinks, oh, you see these comments like, "Oh yeah, I lost 20 pounds on the carnivore," and anything that's outside of that is going to get deleted. And then you just keep building this. Like same thing. Do you know who Medical Medium is?
I don't know medical medium.
Oh,
Yeah.
Medical Medium is this guy says that he speaks to spirits, and he came up with this protocol to heal all like all autoimmune disease and thyroid disease and all this. And he has like his following is bigger than Paul Saladino's. He has like
What is it again?
Medical Medium.
Okay, I gotta just do this real
He has
time.
like 3 million followers. I mean, he published multiple books, some like multiple New York Times bestsellers. Like,
Okay, I got him here now.
and his protocol is like celery juice. Like drinking celery juice has these magical benefits, and then it's a vegan diet and a bunch of supplements. And when people do this, some of them feel better. I've met dozens of people who have tried this thinking that it was going to be this magical solution, and then they felt horrible and they thought there was something wrong with them. Because if you fall into this echo chamber and you're like, "Oh wow, everyone else is improving, what am I doing wrong? Like this is my fault." And that's what, like, the Medical Medium, same thing. Like if I on the same topic, like he created an eczema, like one of his was like eczema protocol or something. Like he says he can heal eczema. I've worked with people whose eczema has completely gone away, multiple people. So if I said, "Hey, I have an eczema protocol," and I put it online, and I said, "Hey, everyone, I have an eczema protocol. It works. It heals people. Do it. If you have eczema, do this. Like this is going to heal you." And if I did that right now, 100 people would do it at least. 20 of them would get better. 80 of them wouldn't. Maybe 40 get worse. 40, see no benefit. 20 completely get better. The 40 that got worse, they're probably not going to say anything, because you sometimes you think something's wrong with you or whatever. Like you're not going to say anything most of the time. Some of those people that do, you just block and delete. And then the 20 that got better, well, my next post, look, my eczema protocol works. Check this out. Share it with your friends. Tell everybody about it. If you say stuff with complete confidence, it doesn't matter if you have any idea what you're talking about. It's convincing. And then your confidence, credentials. I mean, I could say, "Oh, I have a PhD," and then testimonials. You put these things together, you create a good story around it. You can get people to believe anything, and that's what 95% of social media is. That's what 95% of the nutrition information online is.
Yeah, a lot of it then is just like bias. Like you're not getting all sides of the story with it, which is unfortunate, but good that you brought it up so that people are aware of it. And I know we only have a few minutes left, but there was one or two things I wanted to ask you about. In particular was protein intake. So if you're someone who wants to maintain or build muscle, is there a specific number you use? Like, is it 1 gram of protein per pound per day? Is it 0.8 grams of protein per pound per day? Like, what's the number that you feel is best if you're someone who wants to maintain or gain some lean muscle?
Yeah, so right there, I mean, you just hit it on the head. Between like 0.8 and 1. I mean, you can go higher than 1 if you can stomach it. Most people can't,
Yeah.
depending on your body size. 0.8 is probably, like, if you're trying to gain muscle, like, you probably want to be 0.8 or higher. You can probably gain muscle a little bit lower, but and again, a lot of this also depends on your training status and things like that. But 0.8 and higher, and then you can go higher than 1. There's no issue with it. It's just a matter of, like, taste wise. Like, I typically, if I working with someone who's trying to gain muscle, I tell them to shoot for 1. And if you don't get there, then no big deal. If you end up at 0.8, 0.9, not that big of a deal. But the what's gonna work, again, it goes back to sustainability, like what you're actually gonna be able to stick to. Because stuffing yourself, I mean, I used to eat over 1, and that was miserable. Like, I used to stuff myself with chicken breast all the time, and like hitting your calories and being able to do that without being miserable is most important. I'd say shoot for around 1. If you end up at 0.8, not a big deal.
Any truth to you can only absorb so much protein at once, or you should try to eat a lot of protein after your workouts? Like, any tips on protein timing, or you think just if you just concentrate on that number of 0.8 to 1.0 grams of protein per pound, then you should be good to go?
So there seems to be a marginal benefit to spreading protein throughout the day versus eating more of it at once. And it's not that you can't absorb it. It's just a matter of, like, getting, if you're going to eat 150 grams, eating 30 grams throughout the day so that you're constantly having a supply of amino acids is going to be more beneficial than eating 100 grams for dinner and 50 for lunch, and then not eating any outside of that. So spreading the protein throughout the day is the most important. But the thing that I always say is just eat protein with your meals. Like, no big deal. Like, if you want to eat 3 meals, eat 3 meals and eat a bunch of protein with it, and don't worry about going too much into it. And if you're going to have snacks, just make sure they have protein. And if you're doing that, you're going to be getting protein throughout the day, and it's constantly, you're going to have a supply of amino acids to support that muscle protein synthesis. That the post-workout thing, it depends. Like, if you fasted and you went and worked out, your body, your amino acid supply is going to be low. So you're going to benefit more from getting a protein feeding closer to the end of the workout, as opposed to someone, let's say you had a pre-workout meal where you had some protein. Well, you don't necessarily need to just like go pound the protein shake right after your workout, because you still have amino acids in the system that are being used for that muscle protein synthesis. So as long as you go and get another meal, in a timely manner, it doesn't, you don't have to overcomplicate it.
Okay, awesome. So, Adrian, I hate to do this, but we're just running out of time. But thank you so much again for coming on the show. You've been a wealth of knowledge. I really learned a lot today. So where can people find you online, and where can they learn more about you?
Yeah, so online you can find me on Instagram. That's where I'm most active, at Dr.Adrian.Chavez. That's going to be the best place. And then I also run a podcast called the Nutrition Science Podcast. I'm working on getting that rebooted right now. I have a bunch of old episodes because I used to I ran it a while back, but I'm trying to get it kind of revamped and get it back going now. But that's another good place to get more in-depth information. I like teaching more in-depth on topics, and I don't get to do that much on Instagram. So that's a really good place as well.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much again for coming on, and I'm sure we'll have to do it again one day.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, see you, Adrian.
Bye.